Good afternoon. I am Delsa Chapman, Deputy Superintendent of Educator, Student, and School Supports at the Michigan Department of Education. Welcome to the Teaching Comprehensive History webinar series designed to expand educator historical knowledge. The Teaching Comprehensive History Initiative was created from the vision of our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. Michael Rice. Teaching history through diverse viewpoints and highlighting historical movements and moments that have shaped our nation will increase student enthusiasm and engagement for history and civics as it is being taught. We appreciate Dr. Rice's vision and leadership in this and other work connected to ensuring access, opportunities, welcoming, and belonging for all Michigan's students. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I now pass off the webinar to Scott Koenig, MDE Social Studies Consultant, who will share highlights of our topics for today. Scott?
Thank you, Dr. Chapman. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Scott Koenig, and I am a Social Studies Consultant with the Michigan Department of Education. We are thrilled to have all of you in attendance as we continue the Comprehensive History webinar series. Before I turn the presentation to today's presenter, I have some housekeeping announcements. Participants' video, audio, and chat features have been turned off. Questions for our presenter may be added using the Q&A feature. Questions will be addressed toward the end of this event as time permits. If time does not permit, questions will be addressed through email. We will provide links to resources using the chat feature throughout today's presentation. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Teaching Comprehensive History website. If you would like sketches for attending today, please be sure to sign in on the sketches link that will be provided on several occasions in the chat during this presentation. You can adjust your speaker view options anytime by selecting the View button at the top right of the Zoom window. At the conclusion of the webinar today, a survey will be emailed to you. Please share your feedback as it helps to inform future webinars. Closed captioning and an American Sign Language interpreter has been provided. If closed captioning isn't automatically visible, select the Show Subtitle option. Your interpreter for today is Candace Barrier. Without further delay, please welcome Dr. LaShawn Harris. Dr. Harris is an Associate Professor of History at Michigan State University and Assistant Editor of the Journal of African American History. Her area of expertise includes 20th century African American and Black women's histories. Dr. Harris's scholarly essays have appeared in several journals and is widely featured in popular media outlets, including TV One, Glamour Magazine, Elle, Vice, the Huffington Post, the History Channel, Black Perspectives, and Paramount Television Studios. Currently, Dr. Harris is at work on a monograph entitled Say Her Name, Eleanor Bumpurs, Police Violence and the Crime That Changed New York, which tells the story of Black women and police violence during the 1980s. Welcome, Dr. Harris.
Thank you. Just let me share my screen. Good afternoon. Thank you for that generous introduction. And thank you to the Department of Education for your leadership, educational mission, vision, and organizing these series of lectures. Today, I would like to briefly discuss the publication of the Green Book, as well as the Black political activism during the Progressive Era, paying particular attention to Black women's intellectual production and thought, as well as their participation in what many scholars call intra-community reform. So I'll start with the Green Book first. In 2018, DreamWorks Pictures released the Green Book, a 1960s story about an unlikely friendship between African-American musician Don Shirley and Italian-American bouncer and actor Tony Lip. And this friendship develops over the course of Tony driving Don throughout the Deep South while on a musical tour. And I know many people have seen this particular movie. Navigating the Southern terrain, Tony uses the Green Book, another major character that introduces audiences, another major character that audiences barely see, and another character that does not pass through the hands of Don Shirley or any other African-American in the film. A more nuanced story is that the Green Book does pass through Black hands. It passes through thousands of Black fingers, particularly that of urbanite Victor Green. And I just want to show you a small clip from the movie.
Did you go to the AAA for the maps?
Yes. No. I mean, the record companies gave me the maps and the itinerary and this thing.
The Negro Motorist Green Book.
Yeah, it lists all the places colored that stay down south. Like, traveling while Black.
This is Victor Green. The Green Travel Book, also known as the Negro Motorist Green Book, also known as the Negro Traveler's Green Book, was published between 1936 and 1966. So the publication of that book is through the Great Depression, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, as well as the Black Power era. The book debuted in New York City in 1936, and Victor Green, who you see right here, was a postal worker from New York City. Later, in about 1947, Victor Green would go on to establish a travel agency to book reservations at Black-owned establishments throughout the country. The Green Book was about 80 pages, and it was mostly for African-American travelers. It was a state-by-state travel guide. The book initially covered New York and later became, in other states, and later became an international guide covering Canada, Mexico, and different parts of the Caribbean. The Green Book was published roughly every year between 15,000 copies and 20,000 copies. So what was the purpose of the book? Why did Victor Green feel it was necessary to publish this type of guide between 1936 and 1966? So I'm going to outline just a few factors that shaped Green's purpose for this particular book. Number one, it has been our idea, according to Green, to give the Negro traveler information that will help him from running into difficulties, embarrassments, and to make his trip more enjoyable. Other factors that contributed to the production of the Green Book. Green recognized the leisure desires of Blacks to travel, to take to the open roads, particularly middle-class African-Americans and working-class Blacks who had saved up enough money to travel. Another reason for the Green Book was African-Americans wanting to avoid segregated transportation, AKA Jim Crow travel, not wanting to subject themselves to harassment or any type of physical violence or verbal violence on Jim Crow buses, as well as Jim Crow railroads or carts. Other reasons why Green thought it was necessary for the Green Book is that he recognized the influx of Southern migration to the North and understood that if African Americans were taking to the roads by car, that they would need a guide to safely guide them to different Northern destinations. Other reasons, and the last one that I'll point out, is Green understood the intersections between being Black and traveling, AKA or i.e. the dangers of traveling. Blacks face a variety of dangers and inconveniences along the road, from refusal of food and lodging to arbitrary arrests. African-American travelers face hardships such as white-owned businesses refusing to serve them or repair their cars, being refused accommodations or food by white-owned businesses, and the threat of physical violence and forcible expulsion from white-only businesses and sundown towns. Green founded and published the Green Book to avoid such problems and complications. So he compiled this list of resources, again, from his words, quote unquote, to give the Negro traveler information that will keep him from running into difficulties, embarrassments, and to make his trip more enjoyable. In response, Green produced a book of businesses that catered and that were friendly to African Americans, such as gas stations, hotels and inns, restaurants, rest stops, beaches, resorts, doctors' offices, and as well as beauty, cultural production spaces such as barbershops. So I want to highlight a really good documentary that I often show students. This documentary was produced by the Smithsonian. It's entitled The Green Book, and it's just a trailer, so it's about a minute. So I'll play that and then I will move on.
Very bad things happen to African Americans going down a dark country road. There was a sense of apprehension. You could actually be lynched.
Smithsonian Channel presents the real story behind the book.
The Green Book was a way to understand how you could get from A to B safely.
That became a roadmap
Right when you open up, it says, know your rights, and it goes state by state.
for some of the most significant people, successful businesses, and most important political milestones of the 20th century.
Owning an automobile was a big deal.
Having a car meant something, meant that you had a rider.
Regular people populating something called middle class.
There were all kinds of businesses listed, just what you would find in a AAA guide, but also very telling in terms of how many areas of Black people were shut out of.
It uncovers the hidden truth about the African American community. It allows us to really just simply embrace the genius of us.
The Negro Traveler's Green Book,
The Guide to Travel and Vacation.
travel-wise people, carry a green book with you. You may need it.
The Green Book, Guide to Freedom, premieres Monday, February 25th at 8, only on Smithsonian Channel.
A really excellent documentary for students. So I just want to give you a few images and a few glimpses inside the Green Book. So again, Victor Green is concerned with Black travel. He's also concerned with African Americans having a good time on their destinations or getting to their destinations without any type of aggravation. So Green says, there will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. That is when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States. It will be a great day for us to suspend this publication, for then we can go wherever we please and without embarrassment. And Green throughout the book he constantly mentions this word embarrassment, right? Because he understands that part of Jim Crow segregation, attendant of that is the humiliation and embarrassment of African Americans. But until that time comes, we shall continue to publish this information for your convenience each year. And again, he does that between 1936 and 1966. I love this image. I often show this image in class. This is also an image that you'll see if you watch the Smithsonian documentary. But I love this image because you have, again, African Americans seemingly enjoying themselves, enjoying each other's company, and right behind, two cars and ready to take to the road. Another really beautiful image. And these images are great to have students actually imagine, of course, with historical content, but to imagine what people are doing in the photo. I often have my students do like a photo exercise, but here you have Black women dressed very well, having a good time. And again, ready to take to the road. Another example of the inside of the Green Book. Most people who go on vacation, as they say in England and in the Caribbean and to other places where the accent is English, are seeking some place that offers them rest, relaxation, and a refuge from the cares and worries of a workday world. The Negro traveler to whom the Traveler's Green Book has dedicated its efforts since 1936 is no exception. He too is looking for vacation again without any aggravation. And if you notice the next couple of lines, you'll notice that this particular Green Book edition was published in the 1960s, probably maybe 1960, 1961, 1962, but we know it's in the 60s because if you look at the organizations that are listed. So for example, of course, this is no surprise. The NAACP, which was founded in 1909, the National Urban League, which was founded in 1910, the Congress of Racial Equality, which was founded in the 1940s, the Student Nonviolent, it's supposed to say Coordinating Committee, but I think this was a mistake on Green's part, but the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was founded in 1960. And here we have the Southern Christian Leadership Association, which was founded by King and others in 1957. So we know that this particular publication of this edition is a civil rights publication. Here we have the introduction of the Green Book. I won't read that to you, but it'll be useful. If you want to show your students, just what the first page looks like. And here we have the listings. And I like to show the listings, particularly from Michigan, because when we think about the Green Book and this publication, we think about all of these other places that Victor Green and his agents are, scouting out throughout the country, but there are a lot of places in Michigan that ended up on the Green Book. And I would like to add that a lot of these places become great advertisements for Black-owned businesses, particularly businesses that are owned by Black women. So here, we have Ann Arbor. You can see Detroit has a whole bunch of listings for hotels. Detroit has a lot for restaurants, taverns, barbershops, Flint, Idlewild. And if you look at Idlewild, look under the hotels, you'll see Casa Blanca, and I'll show you an image of that hotel in a minute. But Jackson had one or two places, Lansing had a few places, Muskegon, Saginaw, Three Rivers, and so forth. This is Idlewild. This is Hotel Casablanca. I don't know when this was taken, but I just love, again, I love this photo. Here is the Mona Lisa Motel, which was listed in the Green Book, and this is from Inkster, Michigan. And at the top, right here where it says Reservation Bureau, Victor Green not only published this particular book, Victor Green also had a traveling agency. And here in the book, he is advertising for his company. So going to take a trip, attend some convention, make sure your accommodations, make sure of your accommodations before you leave. Housing conditions make this necessary. So he's inviting people to enlist his services. And again, I think I may have mentioned this last week. If you're interested in, it's a scholarly text, but it's also, this book is published by a trade press, so it's a very wide audience. But I suggest this book by Candice Taylor, Overground Railroad, The Green Book, and the Roots of Black Travel in America. A really, really good read on the Green Book. And if you have students, I suggest these two websites. The Green Book online exhibits, really interactive for students, scholars, as well as teachers. I would click on this, but I'm afraid that I might mess up my PowerPoint, but it's a really good guide for students. Each link will give you a map, and then you can click on a state or a city, and it'll kind of zero in on some of those places that are listed in the Green Book. So really, really great resource for students. Sundown towns. These are towns that had little or no Black populations. And many African Americans were, actually run out of these towns. I mean, the saying goes, if, you had to be out of a particular town, a white-only town before the sun went down. And here's a great primary source for students about some of these kind of all-white towns. And I'll just read a little bit. This is from the New York Times, and this is Richmond, Indiana. Let me see if I can read it. The print is really small. The last Negro has left Decatur, Indiana. His departure was caused by the anti-Negro feeling. About a month ago, a mob of 50 men drove out all of the Negroes who were then making that city their home, right? So an influx of African Americans to this particular town caused many whites in the town to drive them out. And this town would be an example of a sundown town. And again, in terms of sources, I recommend the Sundown Towns, A Hidden Dimension of American Racism by James Lowen. And one of my favorite features of this presentation is the Lovecraft Country series, which came on HBO a couple of years ago. And this particular scene is a great example of what I'm talking about when it comes to these sundown towns or white-only towns where African Americans are not welcome. So the clip is a little long. It's about 5 minutes, but I'm going to play the entire thing because it's worth playing.
One of Lovecraft stories.
So what do they look like?
Massive bubble blob with hundreds of eyes.
Oh, well, that's not scary at all. We can outrun a blob.
On the doors, can't
You cannot.
You in the car, get out. And everybody come around to the back of the vehicle. All right. Who are you? George Freeman, sir. This is my nephew, Atticus, and his friend Letitia. Where y'all from? Chicago, sir. You're a long way from home. Oh, we're just passing through, taking a little bathroom break, sir, is all. Any of you all know what a sundown town is? Yes, sir, we do. Well, this is a sundown county. If I had found you pissing in my woods like animals after dark, it would have been my sworn duty to hang every one from them trees. It's not sundown yet. Sunset is at 7:09 today. That's 7 minutes from now. Then we'll be out of the county in 6. Now that's impossible heading south on the road you're currently on, unless you were to speed. And if you were to speed, I'd have to pull you over. Then we'll head north. That might work. Why don't you give it a try? We will, sir. Is it legal to make a U-turn here? Aren't you a smart one? Now, ordinarily, I would consider a U-turn a violation. But if you ask me real nice, I might just let it go this time. Please. Oh, you can do better than that. Say, pretty please, will you let this smart nigga make a U-turn here? Pretty please, will you let this smart nigga make a U-turn here? All right. Just this one time since you asked so nicely. How far, George? We got 2.5 kilometers to the county line.
Can we make
Wait, I'm sorry. It's L3. We got to pass the train tracks. Thomas, it's 7:05.
We have to.
Okay, so spoiler alert, they do make it. They make it into another town, which is a white only town, and then the sheriffs and the police officers get eaten by monsters. So, but they do make it out. If you're thinking about more primary sources, I think this may have been posted last week, but here's a list of primary sources that I use in my class. Some of it's from PBS, the Library of Congress, as well as the Jacob Lawrence Migration Collection. And if you're thinking about books for perhaps high school students or even middle school students, I recommend this particular source, which is entitled Making Our Way Home, The Great Migration and the Black American Dream. So I want to turn my attention now to the progressive era and Black political activists. When we think about the progressive era, we're mostly talking roughly in terms of dates of the 1890s to the 1920s. This is a time or an era of reform, and the type of reform that I'm talking about is the settlement house movement, the suffrage movement, the temperance movement. There's a civil rights, emergence of civil rights organizations happening during this particular time. World War II is between 1914 and 1918. The first Red Scare right after World War I happens is at this time. This is the era of eugenics, the 1920s. This is an age of technology and speed. We see the emergence of refrigerators and radios and vacuum cleaners. We see women wearing, the latest fashions, such as cloche hats, stockings. Coco Chanel comes out with Chanel No. 5. The little black dress becomes, popular at this particular time. This is the era of prohibition, which ends in about the early 1930s. We see women loosening up, the loosening of gender roles, if you will. And this is also an era of restricted immigration, particularly with the national quota system that happens in the 1920s. And for a scholar like this man, Rayford Logan, who was a professor at Howard University during the early and mid 20th century, this is also what he would call the nadir, roughly between 1877, after Reconstruction, after the Compromise of 1877, and 1901. And we can probably extend this time period of 1901 a little bit further. So what does he mean by the nadir? African-American scholar Rayford Logan wrote a book in 1954, was published in 1954, entitled The Negro in American Life and Thought, the Nadir 1877 to 1901. And he used this particular term to describe the state of African-American life during the post-emancipation and progressive era. Logan described this particular time period as the worst period for Blacks and race relations in America. And again, we can extend that time period past 1901. Other scholars have, such as John Hope Franklin. During this particular time, Blacks lost civil rights gained during and after the Reconstruction period. African Americans also endured and were subjected to violence, lynching, segregation, race, gender, and class oppression, white supremacy, as well as race riots. And if we're thinking about race riots, I'm particularly talking about the race riot in Springfield in 1908, the Atlanta race riot in 1916, the race riot in East St. Louis, which was in 1917, the race riot in Houston, Texas, which was in 1917, and Chicago's race riot in 1919, also known as Red Summer, right? So African-American organizations that are being formed at this particular time, whether it's the NAACP, the Urban League, Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, as well as the women that I'm going to focus on today, the National Association of Colored Women, they are operating, functioning under these particular, under this particular context. So who are the Black progressive era reformers? And the Black progressive era reformers are very much like many of the white progressive era reformers who we've learned about. So these would be women, working class and middle class men and women, but women in particular, who are educated by way of having a high school diploma or college educated. These are women who believe that it was their responsibility to impart middle class or quote unquote better class values onto working class and urban and rural poor people, as if those people had no values, right? These are the reformers are people who believe that society could be reformed and be redeemed. And they saw themselves as these kind of moral custodians of society. They were the guardians of what scholars call racial uplift and the guardians of what scholars call respectability politics, which I'll explain in a few minutes, hopefully, if I have time. So what types of reforms are people engaging in? Again, Black women, suffrage, the settlement house movement. They are interested in, they're against vice, particularly like sex work, gambling, alcohol. Many of them are against different forms of eugenics, and many of them are part of the temperance movement. Now, while African-American progressive era reformers see themselves as these moral custodians, and they genuinely want to help those within their community, which we call an intra-community reform impulse, there is a certain level of social control or surveillance of Black poor bodies happening at the same time. Again, just to kind of bring a little bit of nuance to the conversation. They're genuine about what they want to do for their community, for their race, but again, there is an element of social control happening. So before I talk about the NACW women, I want to talk just a little bit about why I'm highlighting these particular women and why I study Black women's history. So for one, if we study Black women's history, it places Black women at the center, right? Not on the margins, but at the center of the American landscape and American history. Number two, when we think about Black women's history, we're talking about the incorporation of gender, race, and class issues, multiple identities. If we study African-American history, we're talking about highlighting across place, space, and time, Black female agency, as well as highlighting Black women's social, political, and economic struggles and autonomy. And lastly, if we think about looking at Black women's history, what we're really doing is complicating and challenging existing narratives and perspectives and theoretical frameworks and concepts of American history. You know, as one of my students says, if you think about studying, women's history, Native American history, it all challenges what we think we know about a particular group of people or a particular country in this case. So that's why I think it's important to highlight Black women. So race reform agencies at the time of the founding of the National Association of Colored Women. So the National Association of Colored Women was formed in 1896. Years later, we see the NAACP forming in 1909. And the NAACP, in terms of their type of reform, they fight segregation through the courts. And most of us in the room, I think, know about Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. There are other cases before Brown, but they used the courts to really challenge Jim Crow segregation. The NAACP is also fighting for an anti-lynching bill, a bill that would have made lynching a federal offense. And the NAACP is against the convict lease system, as well as the chain gang systems that's operating in the United States. The NAACP, as you probably already know, was instrumental in creating a Black national anthem under one of its field secretaries, whose name is James Weldon Johnson, and his brother John Johnson, who both wrote the lyrics and composed the music in 1900 for that particular song. And I'll go back to this page, this slide, but I'll just play the song, play a little bit of the song. So here's James Weldon Johnson, who was a field secretary, one of the first secretaries for the NAACP. And again, the song starts off as a poem. So lift every voice and sing, till earth, heaven, and ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. So here you have, I usually give my students the words. And if you're interested in that history of the song, I would suggest Imani Perry's book, May We Forever Stand, A History of the Black National Anthem. And I'll just play a little bit. I wanted to play this. You may have heard Lift Every Voice and Sing at the most recent Super Bowl in 2023, which was sung by Cheryl Lee Ralph. And I love her because I love that show, Abbott Elementary. But this is the first time that a Black person performed the Black National Anthem on the field before the Super Bowl. So it was a really big event for her and really for the song. So I'll just play a little bit of this, and then I'll go back to some of the other race reform agencies.
We go to Arrowhead now for Lift Every Voice and Sing as it's played in the stadium. At the dawn of the 20th voice and sing.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening sky. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea.
So when you go back and listen to this recording, you can play the entire clip. So that's the NAACP. The Urban League was formed in 1910, and the Urban League is composed of a group of interracial social workers, both Black and white, who are concerned about studying urban conditions, things happening in the city like crime and vice, housing discrimination, labor discrimination. And the Urban League also produced a magazine called Opportunity Magazine, which highlighted the works of, kind of famous Harlem Renaissance writers during the 20s and the 30s. And I'll talk just a little bit briefly about some of those folks in a minute. And then we have the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was formed in 1914 by Marcus Garvey in Jamaica. The first UNIA chapter was formed in New York City in 1916. And unlike the NAACP, unlike the Urban League, and unlike the NACW, the UNIA is an international or transnational organization. They have chapters throughout the world. Garveyism is wide, and it's definitely spreading really quickly during the early and mid 20th century. And this is a Black nationalist or Pan-Africanist organization. This is the Urban League's magazine, the Opportune magazine. And Opportune magazine featured the writings of folks like Zora Neale Hurston, Claude McKay, and also Langston used, and they often featured literary contests. And a lot of the, just in case I don't get to this later, a lot of the literary contests were underwritten by informal economy workers, meaning people who engaged in labor that was considered to be illicit, illegal, or quasi-legal. And I'll talk a little bit more about that if we have time. NACW women and supporters. I just want to highlight just a few women before I talk about about the organization. One woman is Anna Julia Cooper, and this is her right here. And Anna Julia Cooper was born in 1858. She died in 1964. She was born into slavery in North Carolina in 1858. She was a teacher. She was the principal of the M Street School in Washington, D.C., which was an all-Black school, which was founded in 1870. She taught math and science at M Street School. She was a teacher, a scholar, an intellectual. She married at 19 and was widowed by the age of 21. In terms of her education, she was educated at St. Augustus Normal School and Collegial Institute in North Carolina, where she earned a BA in 1884. She earned an MA from Oberlin in math in the late 1880s. And she is the first Black woman to receive a Ph.D. from the University of Paris, either in 1924 or 1925. And notably to her, she was over 50 years old when she received her PhD, and she was taking care of her brother's 5 children. So she was a mother while in grad school abroad and while writing this dissertation. Her dissertation, very much like W.E.B. Du Bois, was on slavery. The title of that dissertation was The Attitudes of French on the Question of Slavery Between 1789 and 1848. So a Black woman abroad doing a PhD on the topic of slavery is just outstanding to me. So hats off to Anna Cooper. In 1892, right up here, she wrote a book, and this was her only publication, called A Voice from the South by a Black woman from the South. Cooper wrote this book while she was principal at M Street School, and the book is really a collection of essays on civil rights and racism, sexism and women's rights right to vote. The book is on education, self-help, and social uplift, and essentially the core tenets of racial uplift. The book, if you are someone who is a feminist, you identify as a feminist, if you're interested in second wave feminism, this particular book, A Voice from the South, is viewed as one of the first articulations of Black feminism, because Cooper discussed the different ways in which race, gender, and class intersected, which is now what scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw would call what? Intersectionality. In this particular book, she argues that even in the wake of Black male chauvinism and traditional gender expectations, Black women's social and educational advancement would improve and benefit the Black community. Cooper also saw the status and the agency of Black women as central to the equality and progress of not just Black people, but the nation. So if you don't know who Anna Cooper is, that's okay, but you may have seen her on the United States Postal Stamp. So this is her stamp, which debuted in 2009. And again, this is, I like to show this to students because it's always a fun fact. Most of them have never heard of Anna Cooper, but when I mention the stamp and then this other little tidbit that I'll mention in a minute, they say, oh, okay, I've seen her before. The other thing that I want to point your attention to is a quote from Anna Cooper. The cause of freedom is not the cause of a race or a sect, a party or a class. It is the cause of humankind, the very birthright of humanity. So again, you may not know that quote, but if you have a US passport If you look on page 24 and 25, you'll see that same quote. So you may not know her, but her words, her theory, her ideas about freedom and humanity is on pages 24 and 25 of your passport. And Anna Cooper, not a member of the National Association of Colored Women, but a supporter of that organization. So now I'm going to turn my attention to Cooper, excuse me, to the NACW for the last few minutes that I do have. So the NACW was formed in 1896. And the organization believed in, it's an umbrella organization, it's a national organization, an umbrella organization for many other smaller organizations operating throughout the country. So the women of this particular group believed in racial uplift and respectability politics. So what is this? Uplift ideology operated on various levels within the African American community. Black elites interpreted uplift as a race strategy that emphasized being thrifty, chastity, racial solidarity, temperance, and self-help. Acting as self-appointed moral custodians, middle-class Blacks use uplift ideology to contest race, gender, and class discrimination, and as argued by many historians, to show evolutionary progress, really, and class distinctions within the race. Central to uplift ideology was respectable politics. So middle-class uplifters hope to modify Black public behavior in order to alter American race relations. Respectability also becomes a gendered language targeted at Black women. African-American women, regardless of their socioeconomic status, were expected to be culturally astute and models of refinement. So in other words, to be a credit to one's race. Public images of Black female propriety were intended to refute racist pseudoscientific literature, newspapers, and other forms of white popular culture that portrayed African-American women as innately immoral and hypersexual. So the NACW, when they are formed, these are the things that are on their mind, really refuting and rehabilitating the images, the negative images of African-Americans, those images that appear to be carryovers or vestiges of slavery. So the NACW, again, is formed in 1896. The organization, which is still around today, was a beacon of light for Black women, and it developed out of an array of issues, societal issues. In the late 19th century, mounting race, gender, and class oppression compelled reformers to organize networks that address the day-to-day experiences of Black women, including racist stereotypes. So racist stereotypes also served as a catalyst for the founding of the NACW. For example, in 1895, a white journalist and the Missouri Press Association president by the name of Jack James boldly attacked the character and reputation of African-American men and women. In an open letter, James adamantly argued that Black women, quote unquote, had no sense of virtue and of being altogether without character. He also claimed that Black women, quote unquote, were sex workers, he used a different word, and all were natural liars and thieves. Jack's comments were circulated throughout the country, and his comments really represented the continuum of racist propaganda that attempted to diminish the image and character of Black women. So that's one reason why the organization was formed in 1896. Another factor was the growth of uplift politics, which served as a means of survival, empowerment, and community independence. It enabled Black women to act as agents on their own behalf. Carrying the motto, lifting as we climb, the organization aimed at achieving self-protection, self-advancement, and justice for African American in general and Black women in particular. So how does this play out within Black communities? It plays out because Black women are performing what we call intra-community reform work. Intra-community reform work really characterized the NACW during the late 19th century and early 20th century. So members developed various programs that provided services for working mothers, children, and the elderly. They're using their own money and raising funds to purchase and to rent facilities, to establish schools, nursing homes, daycare centers, clubs for mothers. Club women taught classes on mothering, childhood, household management, hygiene, as well as domestic responsibility. More examples. In urban communities, club women established programs such as the Cleveland Home for Age-Colored People. Under the leadership of Mary E. McCoy, the wife of inventor Eli McCoy, club women in Detroit founded the Phyllis Wheatley Home for Age-Colored Women in 1898. Members also developed services for children and working class women. In 1899, Amanda Smith used her own money to establish a school, really a nursery, in Harvey, Illinois. In 1897, Victoria Earl Matthews formed the White Rose Home in New York. This settlement house aided Southern Black women who were migrating during the Great Migration. So the NAC women are doing a lot of things for Black communities because they understand that these communities are underserved. Another example in terms of some of the kind of racist stereotypes of the time period, the Progressive era, is of course this one right here. This is Aunt Jemima. The real Aunt Jemima, her name was, the first one was named Nancy Green. She debuted at the Chicago World Fair in 1896. And the NACW women, the organization, is fighting against these kind of popular cultural images of Black women as maids and as cooks. Another example of this is, again, the continued commercialization of mammies used for, pancake mixes. We see them in silent picture films, such as Birth of a Nation, which comes out in the 1910s, and then definitely in the 1920s and the 1930s with movies like Gone with the Wind or Imitation of Life, which comes out in the 1930s. And we see this happening in 1922, and I won't go too deeply into this just because of time's sake. But in 1922, the United Daughters of the Confederacy proposed to pay for a statue in Washington, D.C., and they lobbied Congress hard for this. There was a Senate bill that was on the floor, which is 4119 in 1922. And the statue and the bill was entitled Monument to the Faithful Colored Mammies of the South. The bill failed due to Black protests from the NAACP, the Urban League, and of course, the National Association of Colored Women. Why were they against this? They said that the mammy image of Black women was a racial stereotype. They thought that this was an embarrassing representation of Black women's character and personhood. And they understood that the relationship between Black maids and their white charges was more complex than Black women, wholeheartedly, solely only loving their white charges and only wanting to care for their white charges. They just did not see this as being representative of Black women. What is respectable for the NACW women? These types of images. So this is an image of Black women at Howard University. This is a sorority. This is Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, Alpha chapter. So Black women who are educated, who are dressed very finely, that's an image of middle class respectability. This is another image of middle-class respectability. These are things that the NACW women would promote, these sorts of images. And this man right here in the front, this is Booker T. Washington, and this is his staff at Tuskegee Institute. This man right here, I think this is George Washington Carver, and right here is Andrew Carnegie. So again, an image of respectability. What is not respectable? These sorts of images. And I can't read all of them to you, but at the top, for example, the cabaret hounds who think of nothing but bright lights, jazz, I can't make out that word, but people who go out and just dance all night. Another respectable image is of a man like, kind of out laundering, hanging out in the street, idle, without a job. Another unrespectable image is, a woman who is, going out in the street in public who is not dressed properly. And then you have images like these, folks we can do without. This is actually a series that was in the Chicago Defender, which is a Black newspaper in the 1920s. And these kind of like house parties, like the NACW women were, opposed to this type of thing because anything can happen at a house party. They can be, for some of them, they saw them as kind of like breeding grounds for vice. These can be also spaces that are rated by police officers, spaces that may be, thought of as brothels, etc. What they advocated most was that Black people should be a credit to their race, like this woman, Ida B. Wells, who I would be happy to share her story with you next week when we actually meet. This is the Ida B. Wells doll, which is a recent creation by the Mattel. It's a great gift. It's a great teaching tool for children. And I look forward to talking more about Ida B. Wells and her contributions to the NACW next week. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Dr. Harris. It was an amazing presentation. I just love the content that you're sharing for us. And it's so helpful for Michigan educators and the work they're doing in creating their learning spaces. So we can't thank you enough. I also want to thank the Teaching Webinar History team. As many of you know, or may not be aware of, that there's quite a team that goes into delivering these presentations. And so we really appreciate everyone's efforts and getting this information out so we can learn together. And also thank you again, attendees, for watching and learning with us. The Equal Rights Movement webinar series continues on March 29th from 4 to 5 p.m. Please note, each webinar will present new content. We encourage educators to visit the Teaching Comprehensive History website. If you haven't registered also for future presentations, we ask that you do. So we'll add those links into the chat momentarily. Thank you all for joining us today. Again, a big thank you, Dr. Harris, for your time, your effort, sharing your expertise. It just is outstanding content. So thank you. So please continue in your email, continue to attend. In your email, you should be receiving a feedback survey. So we ask that you fill that out. It helps us to improve our efforts on behalf and for you. So appreciate that. We'll keep the webinar open for a few more moments in time here. So you may grab any links that you may have missed, specifically the sketches link and or any resources that we've added for your information. And then we'll be closing out the portion of today's presentation on your end. So thank you again, Dr. Harris. Thank you, team. And thank you, attendees. Have a great rest of the day.